Merkel Media.
I'm exhausted, looking for everything in the shadows. Start looking at people like they don't matter. I'm waking up to the fact, more than a little bit shallow. I'm lost in this hole, but I don't wanna. I'm lost in this hole, 'cause I'm just trying to
What's good, guys? We are back with another episode of Free the Rabbits, and today we are going to get into the Men in Black. But it won't be what you think. We will touch on some of the very early stories about the Men in Black, but today we are going to talk about the occult origins of the Men in Black. And it's a part of the Men in Black that's not talked about a lot. There have been some people who have written about it, and one of those people I'll talk about today, and how he's connected some very famous occultists to this idea of the Men in Black, and how that it's not an extraterrestrial thing, it's more of a spiritual thing. Now, I want to preface it by saying I don't think that all Men in Black are the same. It's very much how I talk about cryptids. When people see cryptids, I don't necessarily think it's all one thing. I know people want to try to box it in and say it's this or that. I think it's more of a wide open field. So I do think that the Men in Black could be several different things, but today we're going to talk about the occult origins of a specific type of Men in Black, and it's probably the most prominent type. Now, some people think that the Men in Black are actually human beings, that these human beings work for said three-letter agencies. And I do think that's definitely a reality. I think that there are people who are in a covert type of operation, and they dress in black suits and they come across a certain way, right? But I don't think that that's probably the majority when we're talking about these cases of people when they run into these Men in Black, these quote unquote humans that don't really look like humans. It's almost like something's put on a rubber suit or a skin mask, or they don't seem that they're actually from this world, but maybe not outer space, but more interdimensional. They have these supernatural traits to them. And that's what we're going to get into today, and what they're actually connected to. Hey guys, thank you so much for being here on YouTube with myself and all the other free-range rabbits. We have just recently started Free the Rabbits merchandise with our Touch Grass shirts, Rabbit logo tees and hats, Nephilim Portal Baby tees, and our brand new Puck Wudgie Tube shirts available in all sizes with several color options. Also, for the people who've been asking how they can donate to the show financially, we have several ways to do so. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/freetherabbits, where we have monthly memberships, or you can give a one-time donation. If you are following on YouTube, we also have memberships there with different tiers, all of which have custom emojis you can use while on the channel. And if you can't donate financially, just you donating your time is the best gift possible to the show. And for that, thank you so much. Keep sharing the show, everyone. Now, let's get back into it. So for people that don't know, the Men in Black are government agents dressed in dark suits who question, interrogate, harass, and threaten unidentified flying object witnesses to keep them silent about what they have seen. So the term's used a lot when it's talking about these mysterious men that work for these secret organizations, and they say they're a part of these various branches of the government, like the CIA or FBI or some other agencies that we don't know the names of, which is more than likely. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Most people say that they are tall men. They have expressionless faces, so basically no emojis, no emotion. I said emojis on purpose there as a joke. They have pale skin. That's very important. And they usually wear black suits with black sunglasses. And you're going to hear about them a lot, especially when it comes to American UFO conspiracy theories. And one of the big reasons that they show up is to harass and interrogate these people who have seen something that generally is UFO based, but could also be attributed to any kind of extraterrestrial life, or what people think is extraterrestrial life, which I lean more towards the interdimensional aspect there. But what these Men in Black do, they come to suppress the information. So if people are getting the information out, they've been known to steal information. They've been known to scare people. People have been known to disappear. All these different things where these Men in Black show up. And the Men in Black, and we're going to get this occult origin of these interdimensional type of Men in Black. But to get there, we also have to look at the Man in Black. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. But there's a James Roger Lewis, and he was an American philosophy professor at Wuhan University. And he was a religious study scholar, and he was a sociologist of religion also. He was a writer, and he specialized in the academic study of new religious movements like astrology and the New Age. So he was very in tune with all of these different connective pieces, especially when you're talking about the New Age, when we're talking about these interdimensional beings. And he said that he compared the accounts of the Men in Black with tales of people in the past encountering Lucifer. And he speculated that it could be considered a type of psychological trauma. So I thought that was interesting, that here's a guy who studies religion, specifically studies astrology and New Age, and he said that the interactions with the Men in Black, and I'm going to get into the Man in Black as well, because the Man in Black dresses awfully a lot similar to the Men in Black that we see showing up after these UFO visits or alien visits. And we've got several guys we're going to talk about today, some of their personal stories. We're definitely going to talk about Harold Dahl and his interaction with these Men in Black in 1947. We're definitely going to talk about ufologist Albert K. Bender and his interactions in the 1950s. And we're definitely going to get to ufologist John Keel, who I've talked about on this show before, and his interactions with the Men in Black, and him saying they were demonic supernaturals with dark-skinned and or exotic facial features. So we're definitely going to get into those stories, but then we're also going to really look at some of these occultists who have had interactions with beings who seem very similar to these Men in Black. Now, I told you we're going to talk about the Man in Black, and I'm going to get into a little bit about the Man in Black. And I know many people have heard stories about a Man in Black showing up at a crossroads or showing up to a person who's trying to achieve something, or someone who has a gift that doesn't really know how to use it. Then this Man in Black shows up, offers them a deal, and this could be anywhere, right? We've heard stories of this happening in another dimension, not just in our dimension. So that's the interesting part about this. And that's why we really have to look at these men in black and the man in black as being supernatural beings to an extent and what they're really trying to do. Now, again, I don't think all men in black are the same, even in the supernatural realm, and what they're trying to achieve either. So the man in black is generally a tall man. Some people say he's very good looking. It depends on who you're talking to, because this interaction is not always the same. Sometimes they say this man has horns and he looks goatish. Sometimes he's very human looking and nobody could tell the difference between him being a human or not, except for the supernatural abilities that he might have. And what he does, he will approach men or women and offer them a new life, offer this bargain. I need you to give me your soul, or whatever that means, right? Do these things, and then I'll give you this. I'll give you money, power, fame, knowledge, whatever that person really seeking. And if they decline, they'll just go about their life and it'll show up as like an illusion. Now, I've heard some people that remember it, especially people that at least have some grounding in the Christian faith, or people around them do. And then when they do become Christians, then it becomes very evident about what they went through. And obviously, if they accept, they're granted their wildest dreams or a path to their wildest dreams. And you've probably heard him called by different names in different eras of history: Old Nick, Old Scratch, the Black Goat, the Dark Man, tons of other names, and the devil, right? The devil's the one that we generally go to. And that's what people normally connect him to, especially from the Christian faith. And that ties right into Lucifer. So this actually goes all the way back to James R. Lewis and what he said about the men in black and their tie into the devil, Lucifer. And this man in black is directly tied to Lucifer, the usurper, the light bringer, the torchbearer, the opener of eyes. So this is known in occult circles, especially when it comes to the man in black. So this is where we have to really look at the men in black, and is it something that's different? I don't think that it is much different, especially this type of man in black. And we're going to get deeper down the rabbit hole of what this really means in occult circles. And he represents sexuality, aggression, these primal instincts. And this is what you're also going to hear in these occult circles too, that the idea of Christianity is suppress these things. These things we're supposed to release. Do what thou wilt. We'll definitely get into that today too. I promise you, Crowley is a huge part of all this. And it really is the baser instincts. This is the serpent in the garden, offering the knowledge of good and evil. And this is what the Gnostics specifically, depends on what type, obviously, but they believe that in some circles that the devil is actually the good being that's trying to help us, trying to give us this knowledge, trying to help us, while Yahweh, the God who created us, this demiurge, is actually the evil one who's trying to keep us from these knowledges that can allow us to become godlike, to allow us to transcend. And this also ties into the men in black too, are these transcendental humans. And we're going to talk about what that means in occult circles too. But yeah, these baser instincts, this is what the man in black exudes, what he permeates. What he's offering you is to achieve your wildest dreams here on earth. And he can make that happen for a cost, but he can make that happen. And generally Christians will talk about how that Yahweh or God creates order, and the dark man or the man in black is the controller and the creator of chaos. So this does play into chaos magic as well. But the idea of the man in black has been around for centuries, different incarnations throughout, but I do believe it's moved more into a modern incarnation. And again, I don't think it's just Lucifer that's showing up as this man in black. I've talked about it a lot on the show about the Elohim, about fallen angels, and how they will masquerade sometimes as each other. They will copycat. They will sometimes go by the same names, depending on what parts of the world they're in or time periods they're in. So they have a similar aspect of mimicking each other. And you'll see this a lot. You know, we talked about Lilith and how Lilith has demons that work for her that also call themselves Lilith because they are the branches from her. So then they have now bogarted her name to then act like that they are this being, and to humans who interact with these entities, they'll completely believe it. And it's the same thing with this man in black. Not all men in black that show up to offer you a deal are actually Lucifer. They could just be lying to you. I mean, that's part of their whole shtick, right? Is deception. So you can't even believe the deception that you think that you're in on, right? So it's almost laughable that people think that they can somehow control the supernatural realm without the power of God, right? Without the power of Yahweh. That's different, right? Because he is giving you power to overcome something. It's different than you wielding power. You know, it's very Jedi versus the Sith in that aspect of the Sith want to lean into their passions and lean into the negative side of things, and they're going to wield that force power that way, while the Jedi are living a more strict lifestyle. But again, the idea of Star Wars is very Gnostic in nature. I'm just giving you a parallel on the difference between God is offering and what the Satan or Lucifer is actually offering. And to the man in black, he's also known as the first sorcerer. He's also known as the shapeshifter, the wanderer, the trickster, the horned one. So he's known to shapeshift. So again, he may come in different forms depending on who he's talking to and obviously what culture they're in, because then he'll just mimic whatever that they believe in their culture, and he will come with that format to deceive them. And we talked about the crossroads, him showing up at the crossroads, and that'll lean really into characters like Robert Leroy Johnson. And if you don't know who he was an American blues musician and songwriter. And he had tons of songs that he played and were written between 1936 and 1937, and they've influenced generations. And I know I talked about him decently in depth when I did the episode on Papa Legba and my interaction with that particular entity, Papa Legba, in my life. And this was back when I was seeking this type of lifestyle. But the story is that Robert Leroy Johnson sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads in turn for musical success. And he was one of the most famous stories of having this interaction with the man in black and him receiving this talent because of it. Now, to get a little bit deeper into where we're going to go with this occult aspect of it and get it to the actual men in black, we got to talk about the white and black brotherhoods. We've got the Great White Brotherhood. We've also got the Black Brotherhood, and this leans into the White Lodge and the Black Lodge. And we're going to talk a little bit about that because I need you guys to understand, if you don't already know what those things mean, before we get into the actual cult aspect, because the White Lodge and the Black Lodge throughout history, at least in occult circles, have been fighting for a long time. Obviously, the people who claim they're the White Lodge say that they're good. The people who are on the Black Lodge also say they're good. And it's funny because you're going to see this weird characteristic where people will claim that the other side's the Black Lodge if it's not agreeable to what they think is actually supposed to happen. When I think that the White Lodge and the Black Lodge are just both wrong. They're not in any aspect good. But you're going to hear this a lot. But I wanted to go ahead and get this out now. And I know we've talked about C.S. Jones on here before, and he was the spiritual son of Aleister Crowley, but he also went by Frater Akkad, and that was his magic name within Thelema. And he said, and I quote, "We are dealing with a full-size world mystery and a real fight between the black and white brotherhoods." So he talk specifically about how that they are constantly fighting the Black Brotherhoods, which I think is almost hilarious, that the adept of the man who was called the most evil man in the world at one time, Aleister Crowley, they would consider themselves to be part of the White Brotherhood. But this ties right into Theosophy and the Mahatmas. We're definitely going to talk about the secret chiefs. Really, on part 2 of this, we'll talk about the secret chiefs and what this interaction between these beings are praetor humans, because in some aspects, they believe that these beings are humans who have ascended. So you've got this weird aspect that goes on when these beings show up, that they're not always considered to be entities. They're considered to be elevated humans who are on a godlike level. So it's supposed to be a mix, a conglomerate of the both. And in some more new age modern circles, they will even throw extraterrestrials in the mix with these other beings, which would be more in the realm of the secret chiefs or these praetor humans. Then you've got the ascended masters, which they would say would be Buddha and Jesus and Krishna. And then you would have these extraterrestrials from these other planets who have also elevated. So now you've got this weird group that would be considered to be part of this White Brotherhood. And obviously, if they're evil, or what is evil really when we're talking about all this stuff, because I think it's all evil, but you've got the evil ones who would be considered to be the Black Brotherhood. Now, the Great White Brotherhood, according to Theosophy, which Helena Blavatsky was said to have gone to Tibet and actually met with some of these ascended masters, this Great White Brotherhood. They're said to be perfected beings of great power who spread spiritual teachings through selected humans. The members of the Brotherhood may be known as the Masters of the Ancient Wisdom and the Ascended Masters, the Church Invisible, and sometimes you'll hear the Invisible College that's integrated in with this too. However, when you hear a more modern side of the Invisible College, that's just a bunch of men and women who have high IQs who are trying to discover what extraterrestrials are or interdimensional beings. And honestly, it's kind of more of a modern take on this as well. So they won't use the same verbiage that would come down through Theosophy per se, but they have a very similar goal in trying to connect to these praetor humans, these beings who can give us knowledge so then we can elevate. And the first person to talk about the Great White Brotherhood, and I just talked about her, was Helena Blavatsky. And she and other people said that they received messages from them. However, Helena said she actually went to Tibet and she was with them personally. And some of these names you'll recognize: Alice Bailey, Guy Ballard, Benjamin Cream, Bob Sanders. Some of these occultists have talked about them in length and their interactions with them, and obviously receiving the secret knowledge. It all goes back to the secret knowledge. And these masters of the ancient wisdom are talked about in Theosophy and said to be joined together. I talked about different beings from different places in service to the earth under the name of the Great White Brotherhood. And they want to make it clear that the term white is unrelated to race besides the common psychological relation and its implications, which is kind of funny because for the most part in the New Age movement, when they're talking about these beings that look like us who are giving us knowledge, we're going to hear that they're extraterrestrials in the more modern movements like the Pleiadians and obviously the Aryans, which is another version. You got several different ones, right? And they are white. And it does play into this eugenics idea that I've been talking about that's been happening since Theosophy, since before Theosophy. And as much as they want to act like that it's not about race, they do definitely throw that undercurrent in there. Now, the modern guys who are a part of the OTO and are a part of just the Lima religion itself, they'll deny that. And a lot of these other secret society groups will deny that now. But its roots did start in that. And I've talked about that several times on this show. So it is clear that there is a eugenics agenda that's an undercurrent within the Great White Brotherhood. I will point to the fact that Blavatsky, she described the masters as ethnically Tibetan or Indian and not European when she met them. So they would have been brown skin. And that's what she said. But the weird thing was there were people that were close to Helena Blavatsky who said that she used this description to hide the real identity of her teachers. Now, some say they were Indian rulers that were very high up, that was why she hid it. Some people think that they didn't look Indian at all, that they were more in line with some of these more pale-skinned, blonde-haired beings. So it just depends on who you talk to. I'm going to tell you what she has said is that they were of Tibetan or Indian descent, and they were ascended masters. So they had already ascended. They were already in this arena of like a Buddha. Now, to get to the Great White Lodge itself, so in theosophy and occult systems that were influenced by theosophy, the Brotherhood of Advanced Souls who form the hidden government in the world and direct the course of human evolution. And the best part about that is they are part of a hidden government of the world, and they're supposed to help the evolution of mankind. And according to occultists, the Great White Lodge is benevolent. They're an occult brotherhood, and they're managing the world behind the scenes developed over the course of 19th century by a kind of intellectual inflation from the unknown superiors of 18th century high degree Freemasonry. So you'll see in some circles where they look at Freemasonry as a negative thing, or at least a jump off point to something negative, even though they're all tied into Freemasonry in some way, form, or fashion. And I always call Freemasonry the gateway drug. You can go super high up in Freemasonry. I mean, there's tons of different rites that you can go long past 33 degrees. I mean, it depends on who you talk to. Some people think there's 360 degrees of Freemasonry. Now, we know that the rite of Memphis Mizraim Freemasonry goes to 99 degrees. Now, that's documented. We know that. So different rites will have different levels. Obviously, Scottish rite is what gets you to 33. But again, there is information out there that says there's far beyond even 99 degrees. And honestly, it just depends on who you talk to, because once you get in those elite circles, I mean, the world is your oyster when it comes to the occult, and go as far as you want, as fast as you want. You know, you just have to be dedicated to the knowledges and obviously the rituals that go along with it. And in this Great White Lodge, obviously, they lend to the idea that there is a particular set of what they call secret chiefs that are running the world behind the scenes. These are beings. These are not people. However, some secret chiefs can be people who have elevated into that godhood. So there's that real gray area there of what they consider the secret chiefs to be. Listen, in the Golden Dawn, there were several people like Samuel Adele Mathers, even Crowley was said to have gotten to the level of secret chief, and they had moved into this ascended master realm, and they were just in a human shell here on Earth, but they were said to be able to navigate the astral planes just like a metaphysical secret chief could do. But I find it funny that they are also behind the scenes running the world, but for the good of us. But it's in secret. We don't need to know about it. We just need to listen to them because they have the secret knowledge. They have the stuff we need. But also, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, there was a term that came for another group that is also behind the scenes, that is manipulating governments, that is also trying to move the world in a specific way. And this is called the Black Lodge. And they are synonymous with the study and practice of evil magic, which it's all evil. There's no good magic to oppose evil magic. I do completely believe in the supernatural. I believe in magic. I believe that people can wield power in connection with entities. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I haven't seen some of this stuff myself, but I can always tell you people who think they're wielding it for good are not. And these things that they are drawing from come from a dark, demonic place. is being sold to them as good. But this goes into that reality of what I've been talking about. Even with Gnosticism, we did an entire 4-part series on the bloodlines of Jesus. And I showed you how that 2 opposing groups can secretly be working for the same entities and the same goals behind the scenes. And I believe this is very similar to what's going on with the Great White Lodge and the Black Lodge, and how that way behind the scenes, the puppet masters, which I believe are these entities, these secret chiefs, are manipulating both sides. And they are manipulating the world behind the scenes. And it also goes to, I've talked about plenty of times, how that I don't think all of these secret organizations and secret government bodies get along. I think that there's infighting and jealousy and power struggles. It's just like a cartel, right? We can attribute it to cartel wars or gang wars or mafia wars. It's the same concept. And this is what's happening in these occult circles, these magic circles as well. You've got one side that thinks they're good, one side that thinks they're bad, and then it's reversed because the side that's bad thinks that they're good and they think the other side's bad. So it's just an endless loop with these entities puppeteering them all over the place. And what you'll hear from the people who claim to be part of the Great White Lodge, and they'll say the differences between the Black Lodge and them is the true path of occult initiation and the corrupt and counterfeit path offered by the Black Lodge. So they're doing it the wrong way. They're messing with magic the wrong way. But it goes back to also what I was saying. The term was used by members of rival occult orders to slander opponents. So back to Aleister Crowley, he would point to guys he didn't like, and he'd say they're part of the Black Lodge. He even wrote about it in his fictionalized, I do this in air quotes, fictionalized book called Moonchild, and it was all about the battle between the White Lodge and the Black Lodge, with the Moonchild / homunculus being a big part of what the struggle was between the two sides. And I'm not saying that there's not a struggle between two sides. I just think both sides are bad. They're both trying to do the same thing, but in a different way. And in early theosophical writings, they claimed that the Black Lodges glorified the separate individuality, while the Great White Lodge sought to lead all souls into the divine unity. The pleroma, let's go get to the monad. We just got to beat up Yahweh. And once we do that, we can get past that and become an ascended master and start rolling with these secret chiefs. Tale as old as time, and it just pops up in everything that I research now because it's really an undercurrent that is in everything. Gnosticism is a very dark occult idea, as much as the modern Gnostic does not want to believe, but it's all there. All of these, even the ones that would even come out and say they were evil in this magical realm with a CK, they're all down with Gnosticism. They all study the Gnostic arts. They read every bit of Gnostic literature. It is the duality. And once you go down that path, you are open to all this. No matter how good you think you are open to subjugation from these entities. And you're going to find orders like the Temple of Set, the White Order of Thule, Satanism, all of these different ideas are mixed in with the idea of Black Lodges. And this is where you're going to get into what the Nazis were promoting as well, and their connection to the Aryan race. And really, it was more of an occult thing than just this idea of we're white and we're better. No, there was a whole deeper undercurrent to all this. But this is what you're going to hear from people who claim that they are part of the Great White Lodge and they follow the Great White Brotherhood, that these people were part of the Black Lodge, the evil ones. And it's been going on forever. So I know we're setting the tone here. I had to let you know what some of those things were to the people that didn't know what they were before we get deeper down the trail of the Men in Black. And we're going to talk about some incidences now of some of the first interactions with these Men in Black, when they happened, who were the players that were involved. And then we're going to move really into the occult aspect of what these Men in Black actually are. So we're going to talk about the Maury Island Incident. And these were claims that were made by a Fred Chrisman. And Fred Chrisman was a fighter pilot, and he later became an educator from Tacoma, Washington. And he's known for his claims of paranormal events and his ties to conspiracy theories in general. I mean, he even talked about in 1946, and this is a year before 1947, which was when he had his UFO encounters and when the Men in Black show up. In 1946, he claimed to have battled with non-humans in caves during the Second World War. So that's pretty wild in and of itself. But then June 21st comes along, 1947, and he and Harold Dahl, D-A-H-L, they said that there was falling debris from an unidentified flying object that fell out of this UFO. And this was over the sky, over Maury Island in Washington State in the United States. Now how the story goes is Harold Dahl, and he's from Tacoma, on June 21st, 1947, he brought his son, 2 workers, and the family dog aboard his vessel, and he was going to salvage logs from the waters of Puget Sound. The North Queen, that was the name of his boat, and her passengers, they all traveled 3 miles north until they reached the shores of Maury Island. So there, this is what Dahl alleged, that 6 flying discs appeared overhead. He said one seemed to be malfunctioning and it was flying lower than the other vessels. He said it began spewing molten material down on the boat. And he said that the dog was so badly burned that it died. He said his son's arm was singed to the point he was taken to the hospital. So the morning after, and this was June 22nd, 1947, a man dressed in a black suit knocked on Dahl's door, and he actually took Dahl out to dinner. And Dahl tells him the story, detail by detail, of the events before. Now, the man who was this man in black, he did a very typical MIB thing that we hear about now. He actually issued a warning to Dahl that he had better not tell anyone what happened. Now, those 2 days were labeled the Maury Island Incident, but that wasn't an isolated incident because the same year, in 1947, there's a lot that goes on in 1947. I'm actually thinking about doing an episode just about 1947 or episodes because so much goes on in 1947. It's such a critical year of what has got us here now when we're talking about technology, advancement, and UFOs and our connection to these beings that aren't from here, or at least in another dimensional space. So later that year, a Kenneth Arnold, and he was an American aviator, businessman, and politician, he had a famous report of 9 flying discs near Mount Rainier 3 days after Dahl's Maury Island sighting. And obviously, there was a UFO crash at Roswell, New Mexico, that happened a couple weeks later. So because of all this extraterrestrial buzz, the Dahl story just shot to the consciousness of the American public, because what are all these ships? What are all these things that are popping up in the sky that tons of people are seeing, not just these people that are having these stories. Now, again, when it comes to Dahl, he later came out and said that his incident was a hoax. And I'm going to explain why I think he was just covering up what he actually saw. So there's a Steve Edmonston, and he lived in the area where this mysterious UFO incident with Dahl happened. And so he hears about it and he wants to start looking into it. Now, he said he found that the documented evidence surrounding the incident contradicted how history remembers it, and the implications of this are enormous. So when he starts looking into these documents, he realizes that I think Dahl was telling the truth. I think the government shut him up or whatever, told him to back off and say that it was a hoax. So Edmonston starts requesting records from the federal government. And as he's doing it, it became clear to him that Harold Dahl only said he made up the Maury Island incident to make the whole story go away. So there's an FBI agent in charge. His name was Jack Wilcox. And he wrote an incredible historical record of what he did for about 16 days in September of 1947. And he wrote that Dahl was making up the fact that this was a hoax. So the hoax itself was fabricated. And this is according to documents from this FBI agent who wrote this during the time that he was checking into it. And in those documents, Dahl says, and this is him quoting what Dahl said in these documents. He said, "Oh, I stand by what I said. I saw what I saw, but I'm now going to pretend I'm a liar because that's an easier thing for me to live with than ridicule. I just felt at this point, it's a story. It's such a good story. And what really happened, nobody will know, but the story itself doesn't deserve to be buried under a rock. And that was that last part. That was actually the FBI agent Wilcox talking about it and saying that, well, he's just saying he's lying, but this is actually true. We need to be looking into this. It gets even crazier. Jack Wilcox tells J. Edgar Hoover directly that Dahl did not admit to the hoax. And he actually wrote, Dahl did not admit to the fact that his story was a hoax, but only stated that if questioned by authorities, he was going to say it was a hoax because he did not want any further trouble over the matter. Now, remember, he had a man in black take him out to dinner who was pale-skinned, looked weird, but he went with him, and he was threatened to not say anything. J. Edgar Hoover, who was probably at the time the most powerful man in the world, especially in 1947, and he actually said, and quoted, "This is a hoax, close the case." So it's a classic case of sweeping something under the rug. We don't want to talk about this now. And who knows what government bodies are working with said entities, and we're told to keep this quiet. Obviously, the government wants access to the technology and whatever else. So they're going to threaten people to keep quiet. And again, what if this man in black wasn't an entity? He could have been human. I'm not going to sit here and say that for sure what these men in black are when they show up to people, right? But from all indications of how this man in black looked, I'm leaning towards it was probably something that wasn't from here, but was working with entities from here. And I mean like government entities. Now, to get into a little bit more of what these men in black look like, we go to John Keel. And I've talked about John Keel before on the show, but he was an American journalist and influential ufologist who was known best as the author of the Mothman Prophecy. So he was a big part of what was going on at Point Pleasant. He wrote the book that became massively popular, spawned off movies, all kind of different things. But he wasn't just involved with the Mothman. He was looking at these different entities. And he said the records of demonology are filled with striking parallels to the men in black. The general descriptions of the vampires themselves are identical to the men in black. The dark skin and angular oriental-like faces were commonly reported. So this is interesting. He brought the connection to vampires. And I'm going to show you a very interesting correlation to the men in black and actual vampires, because they actually have a lot of similarities. So one similarity is blood. So vampires have always been associated with blood, either in rituals or drinking it. But here's a very interesting thing about the men in black. And this actually happened in Point Pleasant when one group of men in black showed up at the home of a family and they were asking for the blood type of the father. And also around the time of Mothman / Indra Cole, there was a UFO trying to attack a blood bank truck, and there were men in black that were in the area as well. So you have this idea of these men in black, what I think, these are the entity versions, that they're asking people for the blood types. Well, why is that? And we can get really down the rabbit hole of blood types and what that could mean depending on if somebody has maybe Rh negative. You know, there are so many different factors that we could look at, but we'd all just go into speculating at that point. And what are these entities trying to do? Was that a time period that they were showing up asking people for blood types because we don't have a database like we do now? I mean, now we've got 21andMe and all of these different DNA banks all around the world that are tracking people's DNA, that know their blood types. You know, back then it wasn't quite the same. So was this a version of that? And again, I'm just speculating this point, but I find it fascinating that there are men in black who are trying to find out people's blood types. And are these entities the same thing as vampires of old? And I'm not going to throw out the idea of vampires now, but I always look at how things have changed throughout time. And is this just the newer version of what those vampires in ancient times were? Flight. Men in black are actually seen flying away from different interactions with humans. You know, we know that vampires can fly, and in different formats. Obviously, we've got the classic, they change into bats, and I'm not really going to go down that road, but I'm just going to talk about the aerial aspect of flying. Well, men in black are also known to be able to fly. Paleness of the skin. We know vampires have pale skin, and we know that the men in black also have pale skin. So I think this is very fascinating. Also ties into the deadness, the undead, and not all vampires are said to have died, but it does tie into the idea that the men in black are often described as looking undead, zombie, robot, puppet-like, that they're almost being manipulated, or they're in some sort of skin suit, that what you're seeing isn't actually what they are, or maybe it's just a version of what they're trying to portray. So another similarity is not crossing the threshold. So in early vampire mythology, that wasn't really a part of it, where they would come to the threshold of the door and you would have to give them permission, but that also came later. And we do find a weird correlation between thresholds and beings asking to come in and us giving them permission to come in. Well, this also ties into the men in black, because many cases of the men in black, they have come to people's doors and requested to come in. If you tell them no, they can't come in. Now, there's been some variations to the men in black being able to teleport into people's houses. I think in those cases, if those beings are doing that, there was some sort of opening in the threshold. Maybe not something that someone consciously thought that they were doing, but because of maybe some of the occult practices they were involved with or whatever else, that they allowed this opening to happen where these beings were able to teleport in. But I think it's fascinating that the similarities between vampires and men in black are very similar. Now, to get even deeper on some very interesting stories of the men in black, we're going to talk about Malcom X. And this is a very good one right here. So for people that have lived under a rock their whole lives, Malcom X was an African-American revolutionary, Muslim minister, and human rights activist. And he was a prominent figure during the civil rights movement until his assassination in 1965. He was also a spokesman for the Nation of Islam until 1964. And then he left the movement and he started his own movement. And he had some beef with people within the Nation of Islam. And he really pushed back from a lot of that, and from its leader at the time, who was Elijah Muhammad, who's going to come up specifically in this story. So we're going to talk about this weird connection between Malcom X and this man in black. And this is from Malcom X's autobiography of Malcom X. And this is him talking. So what I'm about to read to you now is he is quoted to have said in this book and what happened. Now, this is when he was locked in prison, and he wakes up in prison. And he says, as I lay on my bed, I suddenly become aware of a man sitting beside me in my chair. He had on a dark suit, I remember. I could see him as plainly as I see anyone I look at. He wasn't black. He wasn't white. He was light brown skinned, an Asiatic cast of countenance, and he had oily black hair. I looked right into his face and I didn't get frightened. I knew I wasn't dreaming. I couldn't move. That lends into the sleep paralysis part. I couldn't speak. Also lends into the sleep paralysis part that we hear a lot about now. And he didn't. So the man in black did not speak to him either. He said, I couldn't place him racially other than I knew he was non-European. I had no idea whatsoever who he was. He just sat there. Then suddenly as he'd come, he was gone. So he disappeared. So Malcom X has no understanding of what this actually meant. We don't really know exactly what it meant. Was it there to scare him? Was it there to give him a signifier that he was on the right path, that what he was doing was what they wanted him to do? There's so many different things that we can throw out there, right? But to get to Elijah Muhammad, when the Malcom X movie that came out in 1992, and this was directed by Spike Lee, and it had Denzel Washington starring as Malcom X. In the movie, though, they implied that the figure was the Nation of Islam leader, Elijah Muhammad, even though out of Malcom X's own mouth, he never stated that that's actually what it was. He never said that this was Elijah Muhammad. As a matter of fact, he would have known if it was Elijah Muhammad. But this is what they tried to twist it in the movie and change it to. And the really interesting part about Elijah Muhammad and his mystery teacher, which we'll talk about here in a second, Wallace Fard, they both came out of high-degree Prince Hall Freemasonry. And they also knew esoteric secrets, which lends to the fact that this being reminds us a lot of preter-human intelligences that we've heard many occultists talk about, specifically Aleister Crowley talk about over the years. And Elijah Muhammad was an American religious leader, black separatist, and self-proclaimed messenger of Allah, who was the second leader of the Nation of Islam. And this was from 1933 until his death in 1975. He's also the teacher of not only Malcom X, but Louis Farrakhan, Muhammad Ali, and Worth Dean Muhammad. And his teacher, and this gets into this mystery part, right? Wallace Fard. And this is real interesting. And he was born, reportedly, nobody knows exactly when he was born, reportedly February 26, 1877. He disappears in 1934. And he was the founder and first leader of the Nation of Islam. And he taught as a part of the Nation of Islam, and I don't know how much people know about the Nation of Islam, but there's some very interesting teachings, and these came from Fard. And he taught black exceptionalism, and he says that black man is the original man. That's nothing new. I've heard that in many different circles. We can look at the Black Hebrew Israelites. We can look at the Hoteps. I mean, there's so many different black nationalist groups that claim that they are the first man. So this is nothing new. And he said the white race were devils created by a mad scientist named Yaqub via eugenics. And if you want to know a little bit about Yaqub, I find it's fascinating, man. This stuff is just so far out there, but it's super interesting. But it lends the idea that these entities are in contact with these people who start these groups, who start these secret societies, who push these new religions, right? They're given this new thing and then they explode it onto the scene. And this is what Wallace Fard did. So according to the Nation of Islam's doctrine, Yaqub was a black Meccan scientist, and he lived 6,600 years ago, and he created the white race. And according to his story, he gathered followers and began creating the white race through a form of selective breeding, and they call it grafting. And they did this on the island of Patmos. Now, Yaqub died at the age of 150, but his followers continued the process after his death. And according to the NOI, the white race was created with an evil nature and were destined to rule over black people for a period of 6,000 years through the practice of tricknology, which ended in 1914. So they're saying in 1914, tricknology ended, and this is why black people became awake and they all started banding together. Listen, I'm going to be completely honest with you, and I say this about any nationalist group. I don't care if you're white nationalist, black nationalist, Asian nationalist, whatever you think that you're the first man or your race is better than any other race, at that point, I just know that you are being fed info from negative entities. And a lot of times you'll find that these people that start these groups are a part of these secret societies. And here we are with Wallace Fard Muhammad, this secret creator of NOI. He was a Prince Hall Freemason. And what's really crazy about him after he starts it, he disappears. He gets in trouble with the law and just disappears. We have no record of him dying, nothing. Now, was Wallace Fard something else? Was he connected to something else that helped get him away? Lend to the idea that one of those two things is very possible. And when we look at Malcom X, who seems to have had a interaction with a man in black, and we look at Wallace Fard, who created the NOI, and these wild ideas that come from him, which I don't think he got just from himself. I think he was taught this from something else that was greater. Then we have to start looking at this as a supernatural event that happened to Malcom X, that there is some strange ideas and entities behind even NOI. So to get to another story, we're going to have to talk about two guys, Albert K. Bender and Gray Barker. Now, Albert K. Bender, he was the author of the 1962 nonfiction book, Flying Saucers and the Three Men. And the three men are men in black. And he's a ufologist. And he served the United States Army Air Forces during World War II. And he was obsessed with UFOs. And he actually founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau in 1952. And it was a success at first, but it shut down literally the next year. So he's obsessed with UFOs. He's obsessed with the phenomena. So in 1953, later that year of 1953, Bender said that he was approached by 3 men in black. He said these men visited him in his house and communicated with him telepathically. So here we go with the idea of the supernatural, right? They're not even talking to him with their mouths. They're literally using telepathy to talk to him. And he received from them a metal disc instructions. And he reported that he felt like he was being transported. So these men, I'm assuming in an interdimensional rift or whatever, because he said he was transported. We're just going to throw that out there. If he said he was transported, he went somewhere else. He might not have been here on Earth. Maybe he transported somewhere else on Earth. But according to him, it was somewhere else. And they shared insights into the nature of UFOs. And they also shared the origin of UFOs with Bender. And after this whole incident, he actually became ill and he didn't eat for 3 days. So after the visitation, he felt like he needed to come out and start talking about it. And he went and told other UFO investigators, but they actually refused. They didn't even want to hear it. And he actually suffered a lot of headaches because of what happened after the 3 men visited him. So he was having health issues. Plus, people in the UFO field weren't even believing him. And you'll talk to a lot of people now that will say that he was a hoaxer. And you're going to hear this in mainstream all the time, that he was hoaxing. And maybe he was hoaxing. You know how I see on the show, they could always be hoaxing. I never throw that out, that some of these guys could be hoaxing. But I find these weird connections when they have these stories to actual supernatural beings, and especially with supernatural beings that are trying to move mankind in a direction they want us to move. When I hear these stories and they line up with that, that's when I give them a little more credence than I do some other stories that I hear that don't have these connective tissues to them. So he actually told his alleged experiences, and they were recorded in a book called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers by Gray Barker. And he was an associate of his from the International Flying Saucer Bureau. And Gray Barker was an American writer, best known for his books about UFOs and other paranormal phenomena. And many people have come out and said they're skeptical of most of UFO claims. And they said he wrote it mainly for financial gain. And listen, could he have done it for financial gain? Absolutely. But I also know that that's a very typical thing for people to say, especially in conspiratorial fields, that if anybody makes any kind of money off of anything, that they're somehow compromised or they're not genuine for what they do. And I just think it's ridiculous. I know plenty of podcasters in the same field that I do that make money, who have great livings off of doing this. And it's funny, the more successful they become, the more people in this arena start saying that, oh, they're compromised, they're FBI, they're CIA, they're trying to deceive us. Or just as simple as looking for a cash grab. That's why they're doing this. And I think that's super disingenuous from this community, especially the Christian conspiratorial theorists too. I think it's super disingenuous, and they'll start quoting verses in the Bible about why things should be free. The truth is free. Well, I'm going to tell you, and I've said this on the show before, the truth is free, but getting it to you is not. Everything costs something. So it's not going to be as simple as, yeah, let me go do all these things and study and spend enormous amounts of time just for you to consume. And I think this is very similar to what we could look at here with Gray Barker. His book was super popular. It was a bestseller. People in the community didn't like it. And it could be as simple as them being angry and jealous and then saying, oh, well, he is a hoaxer and he's putting out fake knowledge. Listen, we hear it now. And with social media, good Lord, man, people feel like they have a free license to say whatever they want. And it's always behind some, fake handle, fake profile. It's never, who these people are. They just come and attack. And it's very similar to what I think maybe Gray Barker went through. And again, he could be hoaxing. They could have called him out and said, hey, he's a hoaxer and we know this is a hoax. But nobody really knew. It was just, he wrote this book. It got really big and he had a lot of interesting stories that were recorded, and there were a contingent of people that didn't like it. So they said he was a hoaxer. Maybe he was, but at the end of the day, we don't know that. But I'm throwing that out there as well because I've seen it myself in whatever, you know how I hate to call this thing a truther community or a conspiratorial community, because I don't think it's a community. Communities of people who get along, who actually try to get along. This isn't one of those things. People think they know everything and they love to be combative with people who think differently than them. And I've just seen a lot of that behavior in this space. As soon as someone becomes successful, they're automatically selling their soul. And I think that's disingenuous. Again, back to the Christian conspiratorial theorists, that somehow Lucifer is more powerful than God, that God can't author success for people who work hard, and great success at that. So I'm putting that out there as a word of encouragement for people who are trying to build themselves. Don't listen to anybody else. If you're doing what God wants you to do and you're building and he's creating success for you, people who are addicted to attacking you or making you feel a certain way about it, don't let it bother you. I talked to some podcasters recently and I told them the same thing. Listen, don't get caught up in it. You know, people are going to do this. And if you allow that to knock you off your path, then you'll never achieve what you're supposed to achieve, that God wants you to achieve. So what's also interesting about these men in black is that a lot of times the eye in the triangle is seen as their insignia. Now, I know people point to the Illuminati when they think about that, but there's so many other different meanings that that eye means. And it is a very occult symbol. So obviously it lends to that. But these men in black are many times seen with that insignia. Also, there's a lot of parallels to many black magic rituals in medieval times and those provoking what would now be known as men in black. Also, we were just talking about Gray Barker. Barker notes that Albert K. Bender's experiments when he was trying to bring UFOs to him, bring ships to him, bring entities to him. This is after he's met with these men in black. He said that the experiments were more like magical conjurations than an attempt at extraterrestrial communication. Any initiated magician reading Bender's accounts would recognize elements of magical conjuration. So what Bender was doing after he met with these men in black would be considered more ritualistic and not experimental, scientific. This was considered to be in the vein of magic with a CK. So I find that fascinating that after he meets with these men in black, that Bender starts doing things that are more in an occult, magical sense than anything scientific. And to start shifting us into what will be the second part next Monday, we're going to talk about a guy who wrote a book called The Secret Cipher of the UFO-Nauts or UFO-Nauts. And this guy's name is Alan Greenfield. Now, I'm sure many people have heard of Alan Greenfield from the Hellier series. And to give you a little background about Alan Greenfield, he's an American occultist, writer, and ceremonial magician. He is well known for his significant contributions to various esoteric and occult traditions, including Thelema, Hermeticism, and Freemasonry. And he's gained a lot of recognition for his extensive involvement with Ordo Tempi Orientis, the OTO, which follows the principles of Thelema, which was founded by Aleister Crowley. And he was actually initiated into the OTO in 1965. And he reached the esteemed ninth degree, the sovereign sanctuary of the Gnosis. And this goes right back into Gnosticism being thoroughly entrenched in these occult secret societies. And back to people who follow what they think is just Gnosticism and this idea that we can become like gods, have no clue that all of these secret societies follow this as well. That should be the first clue. It's a false doctrine, but it's not to people because they will just say that those groups twisted it. Oh, they twisted it. They made it more evil. It's not evil though, because it's duality, right? That's going to be their argument, that you've got this duality, this good and evil that are equal. There's no good outweighs the bad. It's just equal parts battling each other for supremacy. And Greenfield has spent a lot of time writing extensively about Thelemic magic and connections to Freemasonry. and he's been involved in all kinds of Masonic organizations. And we talked about the Memphis Mizraim Rite, and he has talked extensively about the 99 degrees. So he is thoroughly entrenched. And the book, Secret Cipher of the UFO Knots, came out in 1987, and it is a cipher of various rituals. But also within the pages are tons of different stories and where things originated when it comes to these UFOs and these predator humans that are associated with them. He's showing the correlation between what people think are extraterrestrials and what they actually are. And I'm going to tell you now, being a Christian and understanding that these quote unquote aliens are more than likely not extraterrestrial, they're from a different dimension, is not just thought of by Christians. It's also a huge part of these secret societies and their connection to these entities. So this ties right into Great White Lodge and the Black Lodge. And I'm really excited to get to that part next week because we're going to expound more on some of Greenfield's ideas. We're going to talk about several other occultists and their ideas. And I'm really excited to show you guys this crazy occult connection between these men in black and what would be considered predator humans, secret chiefs, Mahatmas, Great White Brotherhood, whatever we want to call them, and call them aliens, grays if you want to. But we're going to show that connection when we get to next week. I'm really excited about this series. It's been a lot of fun for me, and finding these connections between what people think are out of this world, but are more than likely something a lot closer home. Guys, I really appreciate you being here. You guys have done so much to help this show grow. If you can, if you haven't, please go to Spotify, go to Apple Podcast, give me a 5-star review there, write a review on Apple Podcast. It really helps the show grow and it helps it get deeper into the algorithm. I can't express that enough to you guys. The more that you do 5-star reviews, the more that you write reviews, it helps the show get out to more people. So then more people come in and then the show grows and then we're able to do more with the show. I really appreciate everyone who's already done it. If you haven't done it, please go do it now. Also, go to freetherabbits.myshopify.com and you can get a hold of all our new merch that we have. We got some more merch coming out in a few weeks too. The store is going to keep building, but I've got some great shirts there. I've got a great Free the Rabbits trucker hat there as well, and they're awesome. Especially touch grass. You can rock that and people will see it. Oh, that's great. What's that? Let me tell you about this podcast. If you're rocking any of the logo shirts, let me tell you about this podcast. If you're rocking the Nephilim Portal Baby shirt, if you're rocking the Puck Wudgie Tube shirt, people are going to be like, whoa, that's cool. What's that about? Let me tell you about it. So I really appreciate all the people that have been hitting the merch store up. So many people have already. Love it. It's great quality stuff too. Soft t-shirts, so it's not going to be all scratchy on your body or anything like that. Really appreciate you guys. On the way out, we're going to play my new single, Imposter. You know what it is, guys. Go outside, touch grass, and get your tail out the hole.
I'm in a fun house, locked in a boxcar with all of these clowns. Don't feel like I belong, but maybe I do. Cause when I look in the puddle, maybe I'm just a ruse. Or maybe I'm just confused. Ooh, I'm a gorilla in the jungle, but my mind's got me trapped in the zoo. Ooh, what you see is not what I see. Cause I could be on my effigy. is a deception above the halls of a minty. If I leave, will I even miss me? Yeah. Face to face with my ambition, yeah. My position with me, I'm in competition, yeah. I could be superstitious, cause it feels like it's a sickness. What you